The wisdom of Jesus Sira in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7.
Herculaas F. van Rooij.
Abstract. The use of the Old Testament in the New Testament has been the subject of intensive research. Writings other than the books of the Old Testament have also received attention, such as the wisdom of Jesus Sira. This study focuses on several texts in the Gospel of Matthew that have been linked to Sira in the past, studying intertextual relations between the different versions in different languages by using a comparative textual critical approach. The relevant texts from Matthew 5-7 and Sira were listed, followed by a brief description of the textual history of Sira in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and Syriac. The texts of Matthew in the Greek New Testament were analyzed and compared with their translations in Latin and Syriac. The texts in Syriac that Matthew may have alluded to were studied, with attention to the original Hebrew and the translations of Syriac. The two translations of Matthew usually follow the Greek closely. In Matthew 6 verse 12, the issue of forgiveness was a common one in Jewish circles. Granting forgiveness and receiving it are linked. This is also the case in Syriac 28:2. The Latin version of Syriac differs only stylistically from the Greek. The Syriac does not mention the neighbor, but has a general statement directed at a person's heart. In Matthew 6 verse 13, the reference to temptation or trial, and to evil or the evil one, was discussed. The Syriac version of Syriac 23:1 probably followed a different Hebrew forlaga than the Greek version. Syriac 33:1 is the only text where the Hebrew is extant. The Greek follows the Hebrew closely, as does the Syriac. The Latin differs regarding the plural of evil, and it makes the Lord the subject of deliverance. This points to a deliberate revision in the Latin to make the mention of the Lord explicit. In Matthew 6 verse 20, the only important issue is the translation of erugo in Latin. It is the word for the rust on copper. The Syriac translated the word with worm. The idea of treasures links Syriac 29:11 to Matthew 20. The Latin follows the Greek closely. The reference to almsgiving and love in Syriac could be the result of a different forlaga. Contribution. This study throws new light on the intertextual relation between Syriac and Matthew, dealing with the different old translations of the two texts. Keywords: Matthew, Syriac, quotations, Greek New Testament, Vulgate, Peshitta, Geniza, Sermon on the Mount. Introduction. The use of the Old Testament in the New Testament has been the subject of intensive research over the last 3 decades and even longer. Many monographs and articles have been published on this and related subjects. Some studies deal with the subject as a whole, while others deal with the use of a specific Old Testament book in the New Testament as such, or with the use of the Old Testament, or a part thereof, in a specific New Testament book or group of books. In past research, writings other than the books of the Old Testament have also received attention, such as the wisdom of Jesus Sira. This study focuses on several texts in the Gospel of Matthew that have been linked with Sira in the past. The relevant texts from Matthew 5-7 and Sira are listed, followed by a brief description of the textual history of Sira in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and Syriac. The texts of Matthew are then analyzed, with attention to the Greek New Testament and its translation into Latin and Syriac. This is followed by a discussion of the different texts in Syriac that may have been alluded to in Matthew, with attention to the original Hebrew, as well as the Greek, Latin, and Syriac translations of Syriac. The question is whether the allusions are also evident in the different translations of the passages in Matthew. The different texts will be discussed in the order they appear in Matthew. Allusions to Syriac in Matthew 5-7. Moyes, 2002, for 19, says that traditionally, the distinctions, quotations, allusions, and echoes have been used in describing the use of the Old Testament in the New Testament. Quotations introduce words from a different context, with a break in the style of the author. An allusion is woven into the text, while an echo is only a faint trace. Moyes prefers to use the term intertextuality. In his article, he discusses 5 kinds of intertextuality: intertextual echo, narrative intertextuality, exegetically intertextuality, dialogical intertextuality, and postmodern intertextuality. The examples in Matthew could be regarded as intertextual echoes, although the traditional term, allusion, is still especially useful for the examples discussed below. Jefford, 2016, 12, is correct, although in stating that identifying allusions is not always truly clear. Jones, 2009, gives a list of quotations and allusions to the Old Testament in the New Testament. This list contains 21 texts from Sirach, some of them linked to more than one text in the New Testament. 5 references to Sirach are related to Matthew 5-7, Sirach 23:1, MT 6:13, 27:6, MT 7:16, 28:2, MT 6:12, 29:11, MT 6:20, and 33:1, MT 6:13. Pistone, 2008, 309, says that of 104 references to Sirach in the New Testament, 24 are found in Matthew. In some way or another, Matthew was indeed influenced by or in contact with Sirach. Pistone discusses many points of contact between Sirach and Matthew, too many to be touched upon in this article. He concludes that Matthew is the bearer of a heritage, which guards with care the effort and the teaching of the sage, page 350. He follows Sirach in the forms of speech as well as far as words are concerned. Not one of the Sirach texts is quoted in Matthew. They are at most allusions to Sirach. Jefford, 2016, 12, says that in Matthew, the most use is made of Sirach of all the Gospels. He distinguishes between the primary and secondary uses of Sirach. Of prime importance for him are those instances where the author had a specific passage in mind. Secondary, he says, the author had a text not from Sirach in mind, but the text from Sirach can be seen as subordinate to the other text. He sees at least 9 primary and at least 25 secondary usages in Matthew, page 13. He has a list of all these instances. Among them are some texts from Sirach linked to Matthew 6 and 7, Sirach 27:6, 28:2, and 29:11, all as primary, page 14. The textual history of Sirach in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and Syriac. Although each of the versions has a long and indeed complex textual history, see Scan and D. Lela 1987, 59, 60, a level of consensus has developed regarding each of them. The original book was composed in Hebrew by Jeshua ben Elazar ben Sira, as mentioned by his grandson, who translated the original Hebrew into Greek. The author was a teacher, and the contents of the book could have been typical of the instruction given to the youth in the time before the Maccabean revolt. The book was written between 200 and 175 BC. The author's grandson one translated it into Greek in the last quarter of the 2nd century BCE in Egypt. C.F. Collins, 2012, 68, 69, Lemeline 2014, 456, Scayan and D. Lela. 1987, 8, 9, after 117 BC according to Scayan and D. Lela, page 9. The Hebrew version of Sirach has not been preserved in its entirety except for a few rabbinic citations. Nothing was known to have been preserved up to the discovery of parts of the book among the manuscripts from the Cairo Geniza. The authenticity of these medieval manuscripts has been disputed. However, the discovery of different fragments of the book among the manuscripts from Qumran and Masada has shown that the manuscripts from the Geniza preserved a text from antiquity, Scayan and D. Lela 1987, 54. About 2/3 of the Hebrew Sirach has now been discovered, Coggins 1998, 34, 37, Collins 2012, 70, Corley 2011, 3, Lemeline. 2014, 453, 455, Scayan and D. Lela 1987, 53, Van Person 2007, 14, Wright 2009, 715. Scayan and D. Lela 1987, 51, 53, Provide a survey of the different manuscripts, their contents, and a timeline of their discovery. See also Corley 2011. 3. Corley 2011. 3 indicates that 5 of the 6 Geniza manuscripts contain parts of a continuous tradition, while manuscript C only contains extracts of the book, often with a different sequence. Push 2008, 80, 86 discusses all the manuscripts from Qumran and the Geniza in detail. He also discusses quotations, points of contact, and allusions to Syriac in other manuscripts from Qumran, pages 87 to 95. The book was well known in these circles. 2 Hebrew recensions of the text are often distinguished, usually called Hebrew 1 and 2, Van Persen 2007, 14. The manuscripts from Masada and Qumran are close to Hebrew I, while the Geniza manuscripts contain about 90 editions when compared to Hebrew I, Van Persen 2007, 15. The second edition has additions not found in the primary Greek manuscripts, Collins 2012, 70. The primary Greek manuscripts are the Codex Alexandrinus, Codex Vaticanus, Codex Ephremi Syri Rescriptus, Codex Sinaiticus, and Codex Venetus, Ziegler 1980a, 7, 1980b, 7, 8. The text in the edition of Syriac, Ziegler 1980a, contains Greek 1 and 2. Greek I is regarded as a translation of Hebrew I, while Greek 2 contains additions to Greek I. In the edition of Ziegler, 1980a, Greek I is printed in a normal size and Greek 2 in smaller letters. In the translation of Syriac by Wright, 2009, 716, the distinction of Ziegler is followed by placing Greek 2 in square brackets and printing it in italics. All the texts in the Greek Syriac that Matthew 5 to 7 may allude to are part of Greek I, with no additions or expansions. The relevant Hebrew texts of Syriac can thus also be regarded as part of Hebrew I. The notion of a Hebrew 2, as a revised and expanded version of Hebrew I, is supported by the additions in the Geniza fragments, the additions in some Greek manuscripts, and the Syriac translation. It is, however, possible that such a revised version did not exist, but that the additions were the result of an ongoing process of expanding the text. Scaen and D. Lela 1987. 57, 58, Van Persen 2007, 15. It is also possible that the Geniza manuscripts contain some retroversions from Syriac and Greek, Scaen and D. Lela 1987, 58. None of these are relevant for the texts of Syriac studied here. Greek I is the translation made by the grandson of Syriac, while at the same time, it contains about 300 additional colas as well as some minor additions. Van Persen 2007, 15. Greek 2 was not a new translation. The scribe of Greek 2 used Greek I and added from Hebrew 2 only what he regarded as necessary. Scaen and D. Lela 1987, 55. Gilbert, 2008a, presents a survey of the research done on the Book of Ben Sira, focusing on methodological and hermeneutical trends. As far as the Hebrew text is concerned, he says that the text is not totally reliable. There may have been retroversion from the Syriac in the Geniza Hebrew manuscripts. He accepts the idea of a Hebrew 2, page 3, as well as the idea of a Greek 2 based on an enlarged Hebrew text, pages 4 to 5. However, the complete Hebrew 2 does not exist at present. It would be better to understand the history of the book as a slow and progressive evolution, page 11. Gilbert, 2008b, 1-3, has done an extensive survey of research on the Old Latin, Vetus Latina, translation of Ecclesiasticus. He says that the Old Latin translation became part of the Vulgate at the end of the 5th century or the beginning of the 6th, page 2. He discusses several texts in the Old Latin. Based on his research, he makes several important points regarding this translation. He says that the Old Latin translation was based on a Greek manuscript, page 3. This Greek text was, however, different from the text in all extant Greek manuscripts, page 4. The additions in the Old Latin text of Ecclesiasticus are of Jewish origin and were part of the manuscript translated for the Old Latin, page 6. The translated Greek text belonged to Greek 2 and the additions were translated into Greek from Hebrew 2, page 7. His final statement is as follows. Therefore, the Vetus Latina of Ecclesiasticus was done based on a Greek text already enlarged. This was partially closer to the Hebrew text of Ben Sira than to the classical Greek version, and partially with early mistakes of translation. Page 10. The original Old Latin translation did not contain the prologue as well as chapters 44 to 50. These were added later, and this translation became part of the Vulgate, as can be seen in Vulgate manuscripts from the 5th or 6th centuries, Scaen and D. Lella 1987, 57. As the Syriac text of the Vulgate may contain additions or expansions, comparison with the other versions is important. Giles, 2011, also presents an extensive discussion of the history of scholarship on the variant forms of Syriac. He accepts the existence of Greek 1 and 2, pages 241 to 243. He points out that all the additions in Greek 2 and the Latin occur in Syriac 1 to 24, page 243. He is, however, critical of the idea of a Hebrew 2 underlying additions in Greek 2 and the Latin, pages 244 to 249. It could, however, be possible to see a Hebrew 2 as underlying the Syriac translation, page 250. He does not accept the theory that the additions in Syriac go back to a systematic reworking of the Hebrew text, page 253. He does not see the Syriac translation as a witness to a Hebrew 2, page 254. Van Persen, 2011, 143, 146, presents a survey of all the manuscripts of Syriac in Syriac. The number of manuscripts makes it clear that the book was quite popular in the Syriac traditions, as can be seen from the commentaries written on the book in Eastern and Western circles, pages 148 to 152. 3 of the 4 complete Bibles up to the 12th century also included Syriac. The Syriac translation was made from a Hebrew Vorlage, which has fused the 2 Hebrew recensions according to Scaen and D. Lella, 1987, 57, and Van Persen, 2007, 22, 23. It is, however, exceedingly difficult to reconstruct the Hebrew underlying the Syriac version of Syriac, Van Persen, 2007, 16. The Syriac also is a free translation of the original Hebrew, Van Persen, 2007, 17. It is also evident that the Syriac translation often agrees with Greek too, as indicated by Van Persen, 2007, 32. Van Persen, 2007, 37, 40, summarizes the relationship between the different versions of Syriac in an exhaustive conclusion, including a particularly good diagram, page 38. Rizzi, 2008, discusses the different theories about the background of the translation of the Syriac Syriac. He places the origin of the Syriac Syriac in a Christian background at about the beginning of the 4th century CE, page 307. For this study, the following remarks will suffice. The original Hebrew version of Syriac, Hebrew I, was translated into Greek by Sirac's grandson, Greek I. The Hebrew version was expanded during transmission, according to some scholars, Hebrew II. No manuscript containing the whole of the proposed Hebrew II is among the extant Hebrew sources. Greek I was also expanded, Greek II, partly due to influence from an expanded Hebrew version. The Old Latin was translated from a Greek text close to Greek II. This version was incorporated in the Vulgate, but expansions or corrections happened along the way, from the side of the Greek I and the Syriac. The Syriac was translated from a Hebrew original containing parts not in Hebrew I, with perhaps minor influence from the Greek. See also Rizzi 2008, 278, 279. Matthew 6 verse 12 is part of the Lord's Prayer and is linked to Syriac 28:2. The version in the Greek New Testament, the Vulgate, and the Peshitta will be discussed firstly, followed by a discussion of the relevant part of Syriac in the different versions. The Matthew text and allusions to Syriac. Matthew 6 verse 12. Regarding the Greek New Testament, box 1, the aorist indicative, phi kappa alpha epsilon nu, can be noted. The NRSV translated it with a present perfect, have forgiven, and not as a simple past tense. The use of the personal pronoun before the inflected verb can also be noted. Box 1. Comparison of Matthew 6 verse 12 in Greek New Testament, Vulgate, and Peshitta New Testament. The Vulgate, Box 1, follows the Greek closely, also regarding word order. The aorist of the Greek is translated by a perfectum. It also follows the Greek with the personal pronoun before the inflected verb. The Peshitta, Box 1, also follows the Greek in the same way as the Latin. The nouns for debt and debtors, from the root hyb, reflect the possible Aramaic root behind the Greek of Matthew. The prayer of verse 12 must be read together with verses 14 and 15. Those two verses state the principle behind the prayer positively and negatively. If you forgive others, you will be forgiven. However, if you do not forgive others, you will not be forgiven. France, 2007, 250, notes that the prayer for forgiveness is the only one commented on later in verses 14 and 15. Forgiveness is a reciprocal principle. It is hypocritical to ask for forgiveness while not willing to grant it. Strack and Billerbeck, 2002:470, say that a prayer for forgiveness of sins appears often in Jewish prayer, such as the prayer of 18 benedictions. They link the second part of the prayer in Matthew 6 verse 12 to Sira 28:2, page 471. They also link the prayer in Matthew 6 verse 12 to Matthew 6 verse 14, saying that the link to Sirach is even more evident in that verse. Lewes, 2007, 322, says that there is no other passage where human actions are as central in a prayer in the New Testament. When one prays the Lord's Prayer, one must remember that Christians still sin and therefore need forgiveness. Hayner, 1993, 150, says that the idea of sin as guilt had an Aramaic background. The Aramaic word, hwb, points to the idea of sin as guilt. See Knoll and 2005, 290, also footnote 331. Judaism saw forgiveness by God as a basic human need, page 290. Davies and Allison, 2004, 609, say that the 18 benedictions had a prayer for forgiveness, but without a condition attached. God's forgiveness must be earned, but this cannot happen if one is not willing to forgive others. Morris, 1992, 147, says that the second part of the prayer should be seen as an aspiration rather than as a limitation. In Matthew 6 verse 12, the Vulgate and Syriac follow the Greek closely, with no important deviation. Sirach 28:2. We often see Sirach 28:2 cited in relation to Matthew 6 verse 12, box 2. Box 2, Sirach 28:2 cited in relation to Matthew 6 verse 12. Scain and D. Lella, 1987, 363, say that the poem of 28:2, 7 deals with the duty to forgive others and not to hold on to grudges. In verse 2, Sirach links the duty to forgive others to the Lord's forgiveness. This idea also appears in other Jewish writings, as indicated above. If you keep a grudge, you cannot expect forgiveness. Page 364. The verb used at the beginning of the verse in Sirach is the same one as in Matthew 6 verse 12. In the Greek, when you pray for forgiveness, it is a condition that you must forgive others. The principle is the same as in Matthew, see Lemeline 2014, 461. The Vulgate has the Old Latin version, as discussed above. It was translated from the Greek, a Greek text close to Greek 2. However, Sirach 28:1 was part of Greek I, so that the texts should be close to one another. The Greek uses a noun wrong, but the Latin uses a participle, your neighbor who has harmed you. The you as object is not in the Greek, but the addition makes good sense following on the participle. The Vulgate uses an ablative absolute for the Greek genitive absolute. For the command to forgive, the Latin uses relink, and not dimit as in Matthew. The Latin uses sins and not your sins. This is on account of the you that is already there as the object of the participle. The Peshitta was translated from a Hebrew text that has not survived. Verses 1 and 3 are close to the Greek. One must expect that verse 2 is also close to the original it was translated from. The Syriac begins with the command to forgive and ends with the forgiveness of the sins of the one praying. The rest differs from the Greek and Latin. It does not address the neighbor's actions, but has a general statement about forgiveness directed at the person's heart. This is followed by the command to pray. Prayer will result in forgiveness. The same word is used for to forgive in Matthew and Sirach, but the noun for sins is a general one, and not the one with the connotation of guilt, as in Matthew. Sirach 28:3, for continues the thought of verse 2. Verse 3 asks how you, as a person, can petition when you bear a grudge against somebody else. Verse 4 asks how you, when you do not show mercy to a person, can petition about your sins. The parallel between Sirach and the prayer is especially related to the verb to forgive, phyepsilon, in Sirach and the prayer. For the rest, the similarity is not related to the words, but rather to the principle. Collins, 2012, 94, refers to the section 27:30, 28:11 in the Greek Sirach. He says that Sirach is close to the spirit of the Gospels by linking forgiveness to prayer. Nolan, 2005, 290, thinks that the link between human and divine forgiveness is even closer in Sirach than in Matthew. The Peshitta is different from the Greek and Latin versions due to a different Hebrew forlaga. It stresses the attitude of the one praying and does not mention the one to be forgiven. Tab 2023, 37 thinks that the parallel between Sirach 28:2, 4 and Matthew 6 verses 14 to 15 is the most plausible example of the influence of Sirach on Matthew. He thinks that the text of Sirach was available to Jesus and Matthew. The parallel regarding extending forgiveness and receiving forgiveness from God is quite striking. Tab 2023, 37. However, the same principle appears in other Jewish sources. It is very clear in Sirach and in Matthew, underscoring Tab's idea. Matthew 6 verse 13. Matthew 6 verse 13 is linked to Sirach 23:1 and 33:1, Table 1. The parallel deals especially with the first part of the verse, NRSV, and do not bring us to the time of trial. Firstly, the Greek and the two translations of Matthew 6 verse 13. Table 1, Matthew 6 verse 13 linked to Sirach 23:1 and 33:1. In Matthew, the Greek and Latin use a subjunctive for the negative command, while the Syriac uses an imperfect. One of the prominent issues regarding this prayer is the meaning of the noun pi epsilon iota alpha sigma. The NRSV translated it the time of trial, while the NIV has the more traditional temptation. Luz, 2007, 322, thinks that the word points to temptation in everyday life, while Hainer, 1993, 151, thinks that it points to severe testing that could even lead to apostasy. Davies and Allison, 2004, 613, 614, mention the view that the Greek word points to eschatological affliction. They prefer a general application to all afflictions, which would indeed include the final affliction. Morris, 1992, 148, says that the basic meaning of the noun is test, but thinks that in this context, temptation would fit better. France, 2007, 251, 252, prefers relating the word to the tribulations believers experience every day. See also Noland 2005, 291, 293. Seisman, 1964, discusses the use of the word in secular Greek, the Old and New Testament. He does not want to subscribe to the idea of a test, but rather a plea to God to protect them against temptation by ungodly powers. He is in favor of the idea of general affliction, not affliction at the end of time, page 31. The Latin has translated the noun as temptation. The Syriac uses NSYWN. It could indicate temptation and trial. Sokoloff, 2009, 925, gives the lemmas temptation and sickness, while Payne-Smith, 1999b, 2390, 2392, uses trial, tentatio, and test, probation, with reference to Matthew 6 verse 13. The word pi epsilon iota alpha sigma is also used in Sirach 33:1. According to Lust, Einikel and Houseby 2003, the word can mean test, trial, or temptation in the LXX. Muroka 2009, 543, describes it as follows, putting of a character to a test. Seisman, 1964, 26, thinks that the word in Syriac refers to testing. It is, however, related to the Greek idea of education. The life of the righteous remains a test while God educates his children. Davies and Allison, 2004, 614, discuss the issue of whether the prayer is intended to deliver one from evil or from the evil one. They say in the West that the usual translation is evil, but they prefer the Eastern view of the evil one. They refer to Matthew 13 verse 19 and 38. See also France 2007, 230, note 14. Lewes, 2007, 323, prefers the more general evil. See also Morris 1992, 148. Strack and Billerbeck, 2002:471, 472, discuss the problem in detail. They think it is difficult to decide between the two options, referring to rabbinical sources that would support both options. The Latin form could also be masculine or neuter. For the Syriac word, Sokolov, 2009, 143, 114, also mentions the evil one as a reference to the devil, with the word then being a masculine noun. Payne-Smith, 1999a, for 40, says that the word refers to the devil in Matthew 6 verse 13. Syriac 23:1 and 33:19. These two verses are both linked to Matthew 6 verse 13. See tables 2 and 3. Table 2, comparison of Syriac 23:1 in Greek, Latin, and Syriac. Table 3, comparison of Syriac 33:1 in Greek, Latin, and Syriac. Syriac 33:1 is the only one of the texts discussed in this article where the Hebrew still exists. In Table 3, the reading is from Manuscript F of the Cairo Geniza, with the abbreviation for the tetragrammaton the same as that from Manuscript B. In Manuscript F, the abbreviation has a jod superlinear, and it has a kametz underneath the abbreviation. The first edition of Manuscript B was published in 1904 by Levi, with his reconstruction of this verse, Levi 1904, 35.
פותח סוגריים מרובעים תת סוגר סוגריים מרובעות לפותח סוגריים מרובעים, ומב סוגר סוגריים מרובעות שים בניסוי, אם כי רע יפגע לא יהיה.
In the synopsis of the different manuscripts, Beentjes, 1997, 151, gives the reading of Manuscript B without a reconstruction. Of the last two words, he has only the lamed, leaving the rest open. Manuscript E does not have the first three words of the verse, as well as the yod of. The rest of the verse is as follows.
ונמלטי שוב בניסוי, אם כי רע פגע.
Regarding Syriac 22:27 to 23:27, Collins, 2012, 88, says that a prayer of petition does not occur often in this book. For him, the most important part of this section is that God is addressed as Father. The Lord is never addressed in this way by an individual in the Old Testament. Scayan and D. Lela, 1987, 322, say that addressing God as Father speaks of the confidence of the faithful in praying and the willingness to obey the Lord's instructions. Wright, 2008, 171, says, regarding Syriac 23:1, that first-person speech is rare in Syriac. The first-person speech in Syriac 22:25, 26 forms a bridge between the preceding poem on friendship to the prayer of petition in 22:27, 23:6. Some issues are important in this prayer. It deals with speech, which is important in the book. It addresses God twice as Father. In 23:1, he asks the Lord to protect him from sins in word and thought, lest he increases his faults and fall before his enemies on account of this. First-person prayer occurs only here and in 51:1, 12. The link between Syriac 23:1 and Matthew is rather tenuous. The idea of falling among the wrong people can be linked to the request in Matthew to not lead them into temptation or a trial. The link with Syriac 33:1 is more evident, especially regarding the word pi epsilon iota alpha sigma. Collins, 2012, 99, says that Syriac 32:14, 33:6 is a poem emphasizing observance of the Torah, linked to the fear of the Lord. Scayan and D. Lela, 1987, 398, say that the expression, the one who fears the Lord in 33:1, stands in synonymous parallelism to the reference in 32:24a, The last verse of the previous chapter, the one who has faith in the Lord and to the one who trusts the Lord, 32:24b. Those who trust the Lord will not be harmed by evil. They will remain safe through repeated trials, page 399. See also Gregory 2010, 77. The idea of temptation or a trial links Sira 33:1 to the prayer in Matthew 6 verse 13. The Latin and Syriac translations can also indicate either a trial or a temptation. The Greek is a good translation of the Hebrew. It uses an adverb, again, for the Hebrew expression with the verbs, literally, he will return and will escape plus he will escape again. The Syriac uses the same kind of expression as the Hebrew, he will turn and be delivered. The use of this expression makes it quite clear that the Syriac was translated from a Hebrew forlaga and not from the Greek. The addition in Latin is interesting. While the Greek and the Syriac use passive constructions for the delivery of the one who fears the Lord, the Latin makes the Lord the subject of the action. The addition also says that he will be delivered from evil, agreeing with what Matthew 6 verse 13 states. Legrand, 2011, 221, says that 33:1b is one of the more instances where the presence of intervention of the Lord is introduced explicitly in verses that evoke classical themes of wisdom literature. He also points to the Latin in 33:1c, making an expression clearer or more complete, pages 222 to 223, also note 45 on page 223. The explicit mention of the Lord delivering the supplicant may be an influence from the side of the Latin version of Matthew. Matthew 6 verse 20. Matthew 6 verse 20 is linked to Sira 29:11, table 4. Matthew 6 verse 19 and 20 belong together as the two sides of the same coin. Verse 19 deals with literal treasures on earth, while verse 20 deals figuratively with treasures in heaven. Table 4. Comparison of Matthew 6 verse 20 in Greek New Testament, Latin, and Syriac. The NRSV translates the Greek words sigma and beta with moth and rust. The Vulgate has rust and moth, while the Syriac has moth and worm. The word translated as moth is unproblematic in the three versions, but the word translated as rust in the Greek and Latin is problematic. The Syriac has a word generally translated as worm, Sokoloff 2009, 42, or weevil, Payne-Smith 1999a, 180, tinea, curculio. The noun in the Syriac comes from the root kl, to eat. The NRSV and many other modern translations follow the Latin with the translation rust erugo in the text above, usually erugo, the rust of copper. Arndt et al., 2000, 184, say that the Greek word refers to eating or consuming and that it cannot be seen as rust. Hayner, 1993, 157, prefers rot or decay. Lewes, 2007, 332, thinks of a wood beetle, pointing to the destruction of wooden chests. France, 2007, 256, note 19, renders it with vermin, pointing out that the basic meaning of the root is eating. The word for treasures, theta sigma alpha upsilon rho, in the New Testament usually occurs in contexts where there is a contrast between earthly and heavenly treasures. Hawk 1964, 137. Treasures in this world could be goods or money kept at home or in a safe place. These goods could decay or be stolen. They could be stockpiled for later use. Nolan 2005, 298. As far as the heavenly treasures are concerned, France 2007, 258, says that their exact nature is not spelled out, but it could be eternal life or some provision for the future with a focus not on this world. The heavenly treasures could also be assembled by good actions in this world. Hawk 1964, 137. For the remainder of the verse, the Greek, Latin, and Syriac are not problematic. Syriac 29:11, Table 5. Owens, 1989, 52, 53, also note 28, wants to understand ZYQWT as almsgiving. This is a possibility mentioned by Payne-Smith, 1989b, 1085. Sokoloff, 2009, translates ZQT with charity or alms and ZYQWT with justice, honesty, benefit, or kindness. In the light of the whole of Sirach 29:1, 20, almsgiving is the best possibility. Table 5. Comparison of Sirach 29:11 in Greek, Latin, and Syriac. The Vulgate differs from the LXX in this chapter regarding the sequence of verses, with verse 14 corresponding to verse 11 in the Greek. In the Greek and Latin Sirach 29:11, the same nouns are used as in Matthew for the treasures, but not the same verbs. The Greek Sirach has the plural of the noun. The Syriac Sirach uses the same noun as in Matthew. Matthew has the plural, and the Syriac can be singular or plural, the singular to agree with the singular of the Greek and Latin Sirach. The Most High in the Greek and Latin refers to God in comparison to the idols. Gregory thinks that the Most High can be linked to the Hebrew. The use of this term is linked to God's providential care elsewhere in Sirach. Gregory 2010, 190. The treasure must be used wisely and piously. The treasure is also earthly, as in Matthew 6 verse 19. Verse 12 in the LXX deals with treasuries, the place where the treasure is stored. Net store up charity in your treasuries, and it will deliver you from every affliction. Charity is equal to the treasure of the previous verse. The Syriac verse 12 is close to this. Lay out charity and put it in your treasury, and it will deliver you from all that is bad. Verse 15 is also close in the Latin. Shut up alms in the heart of the poor, and that will protect you against all evil. Verse 11 in the Syriac Sirach also refers to treasures, but then states that it must be put in almsgiving and love. This will then be the best possession one can own. Gregory, 2010, 183, thinks that the Greek is better than the Syriac in verse 11b. Van Person, 2007, 85, says that there is a pattern in the Syriac to suppress references to the law. See also Gregory, 2010, 183. Owens, 1989, discusses the use of Sirach by Aphrahat. One of the examples he discusses is a passage in the demonstrations that uses Sirach 29:11 and 12. In his quotation, Aphrahat combines the two verses, using the first part of verse 12 and the second part of verse 11. Owens, 1989, 52, translates the quotation as follows, and again it says, "Store up almsgiving and thus make a treasury, and it will be better for you than all treasures." He discusses this quotation also with reference to Sirach 120. This passage in the demonstrations can be dated to 344, page 48, thus 2 centuries before the oldest complete manuscript containing the Syriac Sirach. The version of 29:11 and 12 in the Peshitta, differing from the Greek and Latin, can thus not be regarded as a late revision in the Peshitta on account of the use in Aphrahat. The Syrian Sirach ends verse 11 with "then all that you have," while Aphrahat has "then all your treasures." Owens thinks, however, that this could have been caused by Aphrahat quoting from memory, as "then all your treasures" occurs in Sirach 120. Still, the quotation shows the authenticity of the Syriac Sirach 29:11 and 12. Sirach 29:1, 20 is discussed in detail by Gregory, 2020:171:221, and by Lemeline, 2014, 461. Collins, 2012, 95, says the Greek Sirach 29:1, 20 deals with loans, alms, and surety. Verses 8 to 11 deal with alms. With reference to Matthew 6 verse 10, he states that good deeds earn credit with the Lord. The case of the poor is different from that of the unprincipled borrower, Scaen and D. Lela 1987, 370. Sirach 29:10b says that it must be left under a stone, following up on the reference to silver at the beginning of the verse. It is related to the corrosion of copper, page 369. They refer to verse 9a regarding the disposal according to the commandments, which states that one must help the poor on account of the commandment. This is linked to Deuteronomy 15 verses 7 to 11, page 370. Such generosity is more profitable than gold. A contrast is drawn here between silver that perishes and money invested wisely, with an eye to the heavenly account. Gregory 2010, 209. The idea of almsgiving, as in the Syriac, fits well in this context. Wright 2008, 77, says that 29:8, 13 deals with the correct use of one's property. One must help the poor for the sake of the commandment. Verse 9. The background for this poem is Deuteronomy 15 verses 7 to 11. Deuteronomy 15 verse 10 says that if one gives freely and ungrudgingly, then the Lord will bless you in all that you do. The notion that hoarded wealth rusts, Sira 29:10, parallels the thought of Matthew 6 verse 20 on the perishability of wealth. Although there is thematic similarity between Matthew and Sira regarding the treasures, the only verbal parallel is the word for treasures. It is not sufficient to state that Sira influenced Jesus or Matthew, tab 2023, 36. Matthew 7 verse 16, table 7. Matthew 7 verse 16 is linked to Sira 27:6. The Vulgate and the Peshitta follow the Greek closely, also regarding the word order. In all three versions, the fruit is mentioned first. Matthew 7 verse 16 is part of a section dealing with false prophets, 7:15, 23. Lewes, 2007, 376, 377, has an excursus about false prophets in the time of the New Testament. As he points out, the ambiguity of prophecy was a big problem. He does not think that the false prophets mentioned here were charged with propagating a false teaching, but that the problem was bad fruit, perhaps an indication of lawlessness. Hayner, 1993, 182, says that most scholars regard them as Hellenistic libertines. They can be recognized by their bad fruit, their conduct. The saying may have been more general in nature, but it is here applied specifically to false prophets, page 183. Table 6. Comparison of Sira 27:6 in Greek, Latin, and Syriac. Davies and Allison, 2004, 706, refer to Sira 27:6, where the fruit is words. Here in Matthew, it is more likely deeds in general. This could explain the use of the plural. France, 2007, 291, says that the lives of the true prophets reveal the righteousness of the kingdom of God. Bad teaching is reflected in bad living. Sira 27:6, table 6. Sira 27:6 also compares man's actions to the fruit of a tree. Collins, 2012, 94, says Sira 27:4, 7 emphasizes the importance of speech to indicate a person's character. He refers in this regard to Matthew 7 verses 16 to 19 and 12:33. Sira illustrates this theme in verses 11 to 15. The Greek Sira has an unusual word order. It starts with the cultivation of the tree in the accusative as the object of the verb. The tree is the subject of the verb. The translation of nets is in order, but does not follow the word order of the Greek. The second half of the verse implies the same verb as the first half. Reasoning is parallel to the tree of the first half, with the notions of a person's heart, the object. The New Testament in all three versions formulates it differently. The addressees are the subject. They know the false prophets through their fruit. Still, the issues become clearer by way of the fruit. Sira states a general principle, applied to a specific case in the New Testament. The Latin makes the comparison more evident by placing sicut at the beginning. However, the fronted object of the Greek becomes the subject of the verb. The object is plural in the Greek, notions, and singular in the Latin, contrivance. The Syriac Sira also has the cultivation of the tree as the object, like the Latin. In addition, the Syriac has a comparative particle at the beginning of the verse. Scain and Dilela, 1987, 356, say that the word lambda omicron gamma iota sigma in Sira 27:4b, 6b, and 7a can mean reckoning, computation, reasoning, and reflection. Verse 6 uses an agricultural metaphor that would have been easily understood by the people of that time. The fruit demonstrates the effective cultivation of a tree. Similarly, speech shows the sentiment of a person's mind, whether he has a disciplined, trusted, and upright mind. Table 7. Comparison of Matthew 7 verse 16 in Greek New Testament, Latin, and Syriac. Conclusions. As far as the texts in Matthew are concerned, the two versions usually follow the Greek closely, even regarding word order. The issues dealt with in the Matthew text, as the issue of forgiveness, 6:12, were a common one in Jewish circles. Giving forgiveness and receiving it are linked. This is also the case in Syriac 28:2. The Latin version of Syriac differs only stylistically from the Greek. The Syriac does not mention the neighbor, but has a general statement directed at the person's heart. Regarding Matthew 6 verse 13, two issues are important. Does it refer to temptation or a trial? The Greek can be interpreted in both ways. The Latin has temptation and the Syriac a trial. A trial seems preferable for the Greek and Syriac. The second is whether the reference is to evil or an evil one. The three texts can be interpreted in both ways, but the evil one is possibly the better choice. The link between Syriac 23:1 and Matthew 6 verse 13 is tenuous, with only the use of father and the idea of abandonment relevant. The Latin is close to the Greek. The Syriac is shorter and asks that the Lord should not let the supplicant fall because of the other people. This difference can be related to a different Hebrew forlaga for the Syriac. Syriac 33:1 is the only text where the Hebrew is extant. The Greek follows the Hebrew closely, as does the Syriac. The Latin differs regarding the plural of evil, and it makes the Lord the subject of the deliverance. This probably points to a deliberate revision by the Latin to make the mention of the Lord explicit. This verse is more closely linked to Matthew, especially regarding temptation or a trial. In Matthew 6 verse 20, the only important issue is the translation of erugo in the Latin. It is the word for the rust of copper. Because the meaning of the Greek was uncertain, this translation was also accepted for the Greek. As indicated above, it is better to follow the Syriac with a translation of moth and worm. The idea of treasures links Syriac 29:11 to Matthew 20. The Latin follows the Greek closely. The reference to almsgiving and love in the Syriac could be the result of a different forlaga, perhaps linked to a presumed Hebrew too. As for the intertextual relationship between the different texts, the Syriac and Latin translations of Matthew follow the Greek closely. The text discussed in Enoch may have influenced the texts in Matthew, but not in direct dependence, but rather through allusion. The translations of Enoch into Latin and Syriac are related to the complex tradition history of Enoch. The Latin follows the Greek Enoch closely, especially Greek I. The Syriac deviates from the Greek and Latin in some instances. This may be related to a different forlaga of the Hebrew influencing the Syriac translation. However, one must be careful not to make the trends in these texts applicable to the whole of Matthew, as Enoch is often alluded to in the remainder of the book. All these allusions could be the subject of further research. Acknowledgements. Competing interests. The author declares that he has no financial or personal relationships that may have inappropriately influenced him in writing this article. Author's contribution. HFVR is the sole author of this research article. Ethical considerations. This article followed all ethical standards for research without direct contact with human or animal subjects. Funding information. This research received no specific grant from any funding agency in the public, commercial, or not-for-profit sectors. Data availability. The author confirms that the data supporting this article and its findings are available within the article and its references. Disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this article are those of the author and are the product of professional research. It does not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any affiliated institution, funder, agency, or the publisher. The author is responsible for this article's results, findings, and content. References. Alund, K. Black, M. Martini, C.M. Metzger, B.M. Wickren, A. Alund, B. et al., 2000, The Greek New Testament, 4th Rev. eden. Deutsche Bibelgesellschaft, Stuttgart.
Arndt, W. Danker, F.W. Bauer, W.
And Gingrich, F.W. 2000, A Greek-English Lexicon of the New Testament and Other Early Christian Literature, 3rd eden. University of Chicago, Chicago, Illinois. Binches, P.C., 1997, The Book of Ben Sira in Hebrew, a text edition of all extant Hebrew manuscripts and a synopsis of all parallel Hebrew Ben Sira texts, Vetus Testamentum Supplements, 68. Brill, Leiden. Coggins, R. 1998, Syriac, Sheffield Academic Press, Sheffield. Collins, J.J., 2012, Ecclesiasticus, or The Wisdom of Jesus Son of Sirach, in M. Goodman, J. Barton and J. Muddiman, eds. The Apocrypha, Oxford Bible Commentary Series, pages 66 to 111. Oxford University Press, Oxford. Corley, J. 2011, An Alternative Form of Ben Sira, The Anthological Manuscript C, in J.S. Ray and J. Usin, eds. The Texts and Versions of Ben Sira, Transmission and Interpretation. Supplements to the Journal for the Study of Judaism, Volume 150, pages 3 to 23, Brill, Leiden. Davies, W.D. and Allison, D.C. Jr., 2004, A Critical and Exegetically Commentary on the Gospel According to St. Matthew, Volume 1, International Critical Commentary, Clark, London. France, R.T., 2007, The Gospel of Matthew, New International Commentary on the New Testament, Eerdmans, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Gilbert, M. 2008a, Methodological and Hermeneutical Trends in Modern Exegesis on the Book of Ben Sira, in A. Passaro and G. Belia, eds. The Wisdom of Ben Sira. Studies on Tradition, Redaction, and Theology, Deuterocanonical and Cognate Literature Studies, Volume 1, pages
1,20, De Gruyter, Berlin.
Gilbert, M. 2008b, The Vetus Latina of Ecclesiastes, in G. G. Zarevitz and J. Zengeler, eds. Studies in the Book of Ben Sira, Papers of the Third International Conference on the Deuterocanonical Books. Shimon Center. Papa, Hungary, 18 to 20 May 2006. Supplements to the Journal for Judaism Series, Volume 127, pages 1 to 10, Brill, Leiden. Giles, J. 2011, The Additions to Ben Sira and the Book's Multiform Textual Witness, in J.S. Ray and J. Usin, eds. The Texts and Versions of Ben Sira, Transmission and Interpretation. Supplements to the Journal for the Study of Judaism, Volume 150, pages 237 to 256, Brill, Leiden. Gregory, B. 2010, Like an Everlasting Signet Ring. Generosity in the Book of Sirach, Deuterocanonical and Cognate Literature Studies, Volume
1, De Gruyter, Berlin.
Hayner, D.A., 1993, Matthew 1 to 13, World Biblical Commentary, Volume 33a, Logos ed.
Χοκ, F. 1964, Θησαυρός, Θησαυρίζω, in G.
Kittle, W. Bromley and G. Friedrich, eds. Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, Volume 3, pages 136 to 138, Eerdmans, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Jefford, C.N., 2016, The Wisdom of Sirach and the Glue of the Matthewditic Tradition, in D.J. Bingham and C.N. Jefford, eds. Intertextuality in the Second Century, The Bible in Ancient Christianity Series. Volume 11, pages 8 to 23, Brill, Leiden. Jones, D.A., 2009, Old Testament Quotations and Allusions in the New Testament, Logos Bible Software. Kiraz, G.A., edition, 2002, The Peshitta, Logos Bible Software.
Le Grand, T. 2011, la version latine de Ben Sira, État de la question, essai de classement thématique de addition, in JS.
Ray and J. Usin, eds. The Texts and Versions of Ben Sira, Transmission and Interpretation, Supplements to the Journal for the Study of Judaism, Volume 150, pages 215 to 234, Brill, Leiden. Lemeline, B. 2014, Wisdom of Life as a Way of Life, The Wisdom of Sirach as a Case in Point, Old Testament Essays 27 2, 444 to 471. Levi, I. 1904, The Hebrew Text of the Book of Ecclesiasticus, Brill, Leiden, reprint 1951. Lust, J. Einikel, E. and House B. K. 2003, A Greek-English Lexicon of the Septuagint, Rev Eden, Logos Bible Software. Luz, U. 2007, Matthew 1 to 7, A Commentary on Matthew 1 to 7, Rev Eden, Hermenia, Fortress Press, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Morris, L. 1992. The Gospel According to Matthew, Pillar New Testament Commentary, Eerdmans, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Moyes, S. 2002. Intertextuality and Biblical Studies, Verbum et Ecclesia 23, 2, 418-431. https://doi.org/10.4102/v.v23i2.1211. Muroka, T. 2009. A Greek-English Lexicon of the Septuagint, Peters, Louvain. Nolan, J. 2005. The Gospel of Matthew, a commentary on the Greek text, New International Greek Testament Commentary, Eerdmans, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Owen, R.J. 1989. The Early Syriac Text of Ben Sira in the Demonstrations of Aphrahat, Journal of Semitic Studies 34, 1, 39-75. https://doi.org/10.1093/JSS/xxxiv.1.39. Payne-Smith, R. 1999a. Thesaurus Syriacus I. George Olms Verlag, Hildesheim. Payne-Smith, R. 1999b. Thesaurus Syriacus II. George Olms Verlag, Hildesheim. Peshitta Institute, 2008. Leiden Peshitta, Peshitta Institute, Logos Bible Software. Pistone, R. 2008. Blessing of the Sage, Prophecy of the Scribe, From Ben Sira to Matthew, in A. Passaro and G. Belia, The Wisdom of Ben Sira, Studies on Tradition, Redaction, and Theology. Ditter Canonical and Cognate Literature Studies, Volume 1, pages
308 bis 353, De Gruyter, Berlin.
Push, E. 2008. Ben Sira and Qumran, in A. Passaro and G. Belia, eds. The Wisdom of Ben Sira, Studies on Tradition, Redaction, and Theology. Deuterocanonical and Cognate Literature Studies, Volume 1, pages
79 bis 118, De Gruyter, Berlin.
Pusey, P. and Gwilliam, G.H., 1901, Tetrauegelium, Clarendon Press, Oxford. Rizzi, G., 2008, Christian Interpretations in the Syriac Version of Syriac, in A. Passaro and G. Belia, eds. The Wisdom of Ben Sira, Studies on Tradition, Redaction, and Theology. Ditter Canonical and Cognate Literature Studies, Volume
1, 277 bis 308, De Gruyter, Berlin.
Σίσμαν, H. 1964, πέρα, πειράω, πειράζω, πειρασμός, πείραστος, κπειράζω, in G.
Kittel, G.W. Bromley and G. Friedrich, eds. Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, Volume 6, pages 22-36, Eerdmans, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Skahan, P.W. and D. Lella, A. 1987, The Wisdom of Ben Sira, A New Translation with Notes, Anchor Bible 39, Doubleday, New York, New York. Sokoloff, M. 2009, A Syriac Dictionary, Eisenbrauns, Winona Lake, Indiana. Strack, H.L. and Billerbeck, P. 2022, A Commentary on the New Testament from the Talmud and Midrash, Volume 1, J.N. Sarone, edition, Translate A. Bowden and J. Longarino, Lexham Press, Bellingham. Tab, B.J. 2023, Apocrypha, N.T. Yusuf, in G.K. Beale, D.A. Carson, B.J. Glad and A.D. Naselli, eds. Dictionary of the New Testament Use of the Old Testament, pages 34-46, Baker. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Van Person, W.T. 2007, Language and Interpretation in the Syriac Text of Ben Sira, A Comparative Linguistic and Literary Study, Monographs of the Peshitta Institute Leiden, Volume 16, Brill, Leiden. Van Person, W.T. 2011, Ben Sira in the Syriac Tradition, in J.S. Ray and J. Usin, eds. The Texts and Versions of Ben Sira, Transmission and Interpretation. Supplements to the Journal for the Study of Judaism, Volume 150, pages 143 to 165, Brill, Leiden.
Weber, R. Erdgreisen, R. 1969, Biblia Sacra Juxta Vulgatam Versionem, 5 Th. Rev. EDN, Deutsche Bibelgesellschaft, Stuttgart.
Wright, B.G., 2008, Praise Israel for Wisdom and Instruction. Essays on Ben Sira and Wisdom, the Letter of Aristes and the Septuagint, Supplements to the Journal for the Study of Judaism, Volume 131, Brill, Leiden. Wright, B.G., 2009, Sirach, in A. Pietersma and B.G. Wright, eds, A New English Translation of the Septuagint, pages 715 to 762, Oxford University Press, New York, New York. Wright, B.G., 2011, Translation Greek in Sirach in the Light of the Grandson's Prologue, in J.S. Ray and J. Usin, eds, The Texts and Versions of Ben Sira, Transmission and Interpretation, pages 75 to 93. Supplements to the Journal for the Study of Judaism, Volume 150, Brill, Leiden.